The Treasure Seekers, Chapter 3, Being Detectives. The next thing that happened to us was very interesting. It was as real as the half-crowns, not just pretending. I shall try to write it as like a real book as I can. Of course, we have read Sherlock Holmes, as well as the yellow-covered books with pictures outside that are so badly printed, and you get them for 4 pence halfpenny at the bookstall when the corners of them are beginning to curl up and get dirty, with people looking to see how the story ends when they are waiting for trains. I think this is most unfair to the boy at the bookstall. The books are written by a gentleman named Gabori, and Albert's uncle says they are the worst translations in the world and written in vile English. Of course, they're not like Kipling, but they're jolly good stories. And we had just been reading a book by Dick Diddleton. That's not his right name, but I know all about liable action, so I shall not say what his name is really, because his books are rot. Only they put it into our heads to do what I'm going to narrate. It was in September, and we were not to go to the seaside because it is so expensive, even if you go to Sheerness, where it's all tin cans and old boots and no sand at all. But everyone else went, even people next door, not Albert's side, but the other. Their servant told Liza they were all going to Scarborough, and the next day, sure enough, all the blinds were down and the shutters up, and the milk was not left any more. There is a big horse chestnut tree between their garden and ours, very useful for getting conkers out and for making stuff to rub on your chilblains. This prevented our seeing whether the blinds were down at the back as well. But Dickie climbed to the top of the tree and looked, and they were. It was jolly hot weather and very stuffy indoors. We used to play a good deal in the garden. We made tents out of kitchen cloths, horse, and some blankets off our beds. And though it was quite as hot in the tent as in the house, it was a very different sort of hotness. Albert's uncle called it the Turkish bath. It is not nice to be kept in from the seaside, but we knew that we have much to be thankful for. We might be poor little children living in crowded alleys where even the summer noon hardly a ray of sunlight penetrates, clothed in rags with bare feet, though I do not mind holes in my clothes myself, and bare feet would not be all that bad in this sort of weather. Indeed, we do sometimes when we are playing at things that require it. It was shipwrecked mariners that day, I remember, and we were all in the blanket tent. We had just finished eating the things we had saved at the peril of our lives from the fast-sinking vessel. They were rather nice things, 2 pennies worth of coconut candy. It was got in Greenwich, where it is 4 ounces a penny, 3 apples, some macaroni, the straight sort, that is so useful to suck through, some rice, some nice large pieces of gold suet pudding that Alice nicked from the larder when she went to get the rice and macaroni. And when we had finished, someone said, "I should like to be a detective." I wish to be quite fair, but I cannot remember exactly who said it. Oswald thinks he said it, and Dora says it was Dickie, but Oswald is too much of a man to quarrel about a little thing like that. "I should like to be a detective," said someone. Perhaps it was Dickie, but I think not. "And find out strange and hidden crimes." "You have to be much cleverer than you are," said H.O. "Not so very," Alice said, "because when you've read the books, you know what the things mean, the red hair on the handle of the knife, or the grains of white powder on the velvet collar of the villain's overcoat." "I shouldn't like to have anything to do with murders," said Dora. "Somehow it doesn't seem safe." "And it always ends in the poor murderer being hanged," said Alice. We explained to her why murderers have to be hanged, But she only said, "I don't care. I'm sure no one would ever do murdering twice. Think of the blood and the things, what you would see when you woke up in the night. I shouldn't mind being a detective to lie in wait for a gang of counterfeiters now, and spring upon them unawares and secure them, single-handed. You know, or with only my faithful bloodhound by my side." She stroked Pincher's ears, but he had gone to sleep because he knew well enough that all the suet pudding was finished. He is a very sensible dog. "You always get hold of the wrong end of the stick," Oswald said. "You can't choose what crimes you'll be a detective about. You just have to get a suspicious circumstance, and then you look for a clue and follow it up. Whether it turns out a murder or a missing will is just a fluke." "That's one way," Dickie said. "Another is to get a paper and find 2 advertisements, a bit of news that fits, like this: 'Young lady missing,' and then it tells about all the clothes she had on, and the gold locket she wore, and the color of her hair and all that. And then in another piece of the paper you see, 'Gold locket found,' and then it all comes out." We sent H.O. for the paper at once, but we could not make any of the things fit in. The 2 best were of how some burglars broke into a place in Holloway where they made preserved tongues and invalid delicacies, and carried off a lot of them. And on another page there was mysterious deaths in Holloway. Oswald thought there was something in it, and so did Albert's uncle, when we asked him. But the others thought not, so Oswald agreed to drop it. Besides, Holloway is a long way off. All the time we were talking about the paper, Alice seemed to be thinking about something else, and when we had done, she said, "I believe we might be detectives ourselves, but I should not like to get anybody into trouble." "Not murderers or robbers?" Dickie asked. "It wouldn't be murderers," she said, "but I have noticed something strange, only I feel a little frightened. Let's ask Albert's uncle first. Alice is a jolly sight too fond of asking grown-up people things, and we all said it was Tommy Rot, and she was to tell us." "Well, promise you won't do anything without me," Alice said, and we promised. Then she said, "This is a dark secret, and anyone who thinks it is better not be involved in a career of crime discovery had better go away ere yet it be too late." So Dora said she had had enough of tints, and she was going to look at the shops. H.O. went with her because he had 2 pence in to spend. They thought it was only a game of Alice's, but Oswald knew by the way she spoke. He can nearly always tell, and when people are not telling the truth, Oswald generally knows by the way they look with their eyes. Oswald is not proud of being able to do this. He knows it is through no merit of his own that he is much cleverer than some people. When they had gone, the rest of us got closer together and said, "Now then." "Well," said Alice, "you know the house next door? The people have gone to Scarborough, and the house is shut up. But last night I saw a light in the windows." We asked her how and when, because her room is in the front, and she couldn't possibly have seen. And then she said, "I'll tell you if you boys will promise not ever to go fishing again without me." So we had to promise. And then she said, "It was last night. I had forgotten to feed my rabbits, and I woke up and remembered it. And I was afraid I should find them dead in the morning like Oswald did." "It wasn't my fault," Oswald said. "There was something the matter with the beasts. I fed them right enough." Alice said she didn't mean that, and she went on. "I came down into the garden, and I saw the light in the house, and dark figures moving about. I thought perhaps it was burglars, but Father hadn't come home, and Eliza had gone to bed, so I couldn't do anything. Only I thought perhaps I would tell the rest of you." "Why didn't you tell us this morning?" Noel asked. And Alice explained that she did not want to get anyone into trouble, and even burglars. "But we might watch tonight," she said, "and see if we see the light again." "They might have been burglars," Noel said. He was sucking the last bit of his macaroni. "You know the people next door are very grand. They won't know us, and they go out in a real private carriage sometimes, and they have an at-home day and people come in cabs. I dare say they have piles of plates and jewelry and rich brocades and furs of price and things like that. Let us keep watch tonight." "It's no use watching tonight," Dickie said. "If it's only burglars, they won't come again. But there are other things beside burglars that are discovered in empty houses where lights are seen moving." "You mean counterfeiters," said Oswald at once. "I wonder what the reward is for setting the police on their track." Dickie thought it ought to be something fat, because counterfeiters are always a desperate gang, and the machinery they make the coins with is so heavy and handy for knocking down detectives. Then it was tea time, and we went in, and Dora and H.O. had clubbed their money together and bought a melon, quite a big one, and only a little bit squashier at one end, and it was very good. And then we washed the seeds and made things with them, and with pins and cotton. And nobody said anything more about watching the house next door. Only when we went to bed, Dickie took off his coat and waistcoat, but he stopped at his braces and said, "What about the counterfeiters?" Oswald had taken off his collar and tie, and he was just going to say the same, so he said, "Of course I meant to watch, only my collar's rather tight, so I thought I'd take that off first." Dickie said he did not think the girls ought to be in it, because there might be danger, but Oswald reminded him that they had promised Alice, and a promise is a sacred thing, even when they'd much rather not. So Oswald got Alice alone under pretense of showing her a caterpillar. Dora does not like them, and she screamed and ran away when Oswald offered to show it to her. Then Oswald explained, and Alice agreed to come and watch, if she could. This made us later than we ought to have been, because Alice had to wait till Dora was quiet and then creep out very softly, for fear of the boards creaking. The girls sleep with their room door open, for fear of burglars. Alice had kept on her clothes under her nightgown when Dora wasn't looking, and presently we got down, creeping past Father's study, and out at the glass door that leads onto the veranda and the iron steps into the garden. And we went down very quietly and got into the chestnut tree, and then I felt that we had only been playing what Albert's uncle calls our favorite instrument, I mean the fool, for the house next door was as dark as dark. Then suddenly we heard a sound. It came from the gate at the end of the garden. All the gardens have gates. They lead into a kind of lane that runs behind them. It is a sort of back way, very convenient when you don't want to say exactly where you are going. We heard the gate at the end of the next garden click, and Dickie nudged Alice so that she would have fallen out of the tree, if he had not been for Oswald's extraordinary presence of mind. Oswald squeezed Alice's arm tight, and we all looked, and the others were rather frightened because, really, we had not exactly expected anything to happen except perhaps a light. But now a muffled figure, shrouded in a dark cloak, came swiftly up the path of the next-door garden, and we could see that under its cloak the figure carried a mysterious burden. The figure was dressed to look like a woman in a sailor hat. We held our breath as it passed under the tree where we were, and then it tapped very gently on the back door and was let in, and then a light appeared in the window of the downstairs back breakfast room, but the shutters were up. Dickie said, "My eyes! And wouldn't the others be sick to think they hadn't been in this?" But Alice didn't half like it. And as she is a girl, I do not blame her, indeed. I thought myself, at first, that perhaps it would be better to retire for the present and return later with strongly armed force. "It's not burglars," Alice whispered. "The mysterious stranger was bringing things in and not taking them out. They must have counterfeiters. And, oh, Oswald, don't let's. The things they coin with must hurt very much. Do let's go to bed." But Dickie said he was going to see. If there was a reward for finding out things like this, he would like to have the reward. "They locked the back door," he whispered. "I heard it go, and I could look in quite well through the holes in the shutters and be back over the wall long before they'd got to the door, even if they started to do it at once. There were holes at the top of the shutters, the shape of hearts, and the yellow light came out through them, as well as through the chinks of the shutters. Oswald said if Dickie went, he should because he was the eldest, and Alice said, "If anyone goes, it ought to be me because I thought of it." So Oswald said, "Well, go then." And she said, "Not for anything." And she begged us not to. And we talked about it in the tree till we were all quite hoarse with whispering. At last we decided on a plan of action. Alice was to stay in the tree and scream murder if anything happened, and Dickie and I were to get down into the next garden and take it in turn to peep. So we got down as quietly as we could, but the tree made much more noise than it does in the day, and several times we paused, fearing that all was discovered, but nothing happened. There was a pile of red flower pots under the window, and one very large one was on the window ledge. It seemed as if it was the hand of destiny that placed it there, and the geranium in it was dead, and there was nothing to stop your standing on it, so Oswald did. He went first because he is the eldest, and though Dickie tried to stop him because he thought of it first, it could not be, on account of not being able to say anything. So Oswald stood on the flower pots and tried to look through one of the holes. He did not really expect to see the counterfeiters at their fell work, though he had pretended to when we were talking in the tree. But if he had seen them pouring the base molten metal into tin molds the shape of half-crowns, he would not have been half so astonished as he was at the spectacle now revealed. At first he could see little, because the hole had unfortunately been made a little too high, so that the eye of the detective could only see the prodigal son in a shiny frame on the opposite wall. But Oswald held on to the window frame and stood on tiptoe, and then he saw. There was no furnace and no base metal, no bearded man in leathern apron with tongs and things, but just a table, with a tablecloth on it for supper, and a tin of salmon and lettuce, and some bottled beer. And there on a chair was the cloak and the hat of the mysterious stranger. The two people sitting at the table were the two youngest grown-up daughters of the lady next door, and one of them was saying, "So I got the salmon 3 halfpence cheaper, and the lettuce was only 6 a penny in the Broadway. Just fancy! We must save as much as ever we can on our housekeeping money if we want to go away decent next year." And the other said, "I wish we could all go every year, or else, really, I almost wish—" And all that time Oswald was looking, and Dickie was pulling at his jacket to make him get down and let Dickie have a squint. And just as she said, "I almost wish," Dickie pulled too hard, and Oswald felt himself toppling on the giddy verge of the big flower pot, putting forth all his strength. Our hero strove to recover his equal what's-its-name, but it was now lost beyond recall. "You've done it this time," he said, when he fell heavily among the flower-pot piles below. He heard them crash and rattle and crack, and then his head struck against an iron pillar used for holding up the next-door veranda. His eyes closed, and he knew no more. Now you will perhaps expect that at this moment Alice would have cried, "Murder!" If you think so, you know little about girls. Directly she was left alone in the tree, she made a bolt to tell Albert's uncle all about it, and to bring him to our rescue in case the counterfeiter gang was a very desperate one. And just then I fell. Albert's uncle was getting over the wall. Alice never screamed at all when Oswald fell. But Dickie thinks he heard Albert's uncle say, "Confound those kids," which would not have been kind or polite, so I hope he did not say it. The people next door did not come out to see what the row was. Albert's uncle did not wait for them to come out. He picked up Oswald and carried the insensible body of the gallant young detective to the wall, laid it on the top, and then climbed over and bore his lifeless burden into our house and put it on the sofa in Father's study. Father was out, so we needn't have crept so when we were going into the garden. Then Oswald was restored to consciousness and his head tied up and sent to bed. Next day there was a lump on his young brow as big as a turkey's egg and very uncomfortable. Albert's uncle came in next day and talked to each of us separately. To Oswald he said many unpleasant things about how it was ungentlemanly to spy on ladies and about minding your own business. And when I began to tell him what I had heard, he told me to shut up, and altogether he made me more uncomfortable than the bump did. Oswald did not say anything to anyone, but next day, as the shadows of eve were falling, he crept away and wrote on a piece of paper, "I want to speak to you," and shoved it through the hole like a heart in the top of the next-door shutters. And the youngest young lady put an eye to the heart-shaped hole, and then opened the shutter and said, "Well," very crossly. Then Oswald said, "I am very sorry, and I beg your pardon. We wanted to be detectives, and we thought a gang of counterfeiters infested your house. So we looked through your windows last night, and I saw the lettuce, and I heard what you said about the salmon being 3 halfpence cheaper, and I know it was very dishonorable to pry into other people's secrets, especially ladies, and I never will again, if you will forgive me this once." Then the lady frowned, and then she laughed, and then she said, "So it was you tumbling into the flower pots last night. We thought it was burglars. It frightened us horribly. Why, what a bump on your poor head!" And then she talked to me a bit, and presently she said she and her sister had not wished people to know they were at home because... And then she stopped short and grew very red, and I said, "I thought you were at Scarborough. Your servant told Eliza so. Why didn't you want people to know you were not at home?" The young lady got redder still, and then she laughed and said, "Never mind the reason why. I hope your head doesn't hurt much. Thank you for your nice manly little speech. You've nothing to be ashamed of at any rate." And then she kissed me, and I did not mind it. And then she said, "Run away now, dear. I'm going to pull open the blinds and open the shutters, and I want to do it at once, before it gets dark, so that everyone can see that we're home and not at Scarborough." Chapter 4. Good Hunting. When we had got that 4 shilling by digging for treasure, we ought by rights to have tried Dickie's idea of answering the advertisement about ladies and gentlemen and spare time and £2 a week. But there were several things we rather wanted. Dora wanted a new pair of scissors. She said she was going to get them with her 8pence, but Alice said, "You ought to get her those, Oswald, because you know you broke the points off hers, getting the marble out of the brass thimble." It was quite true, though. I had almost forgotten it. But then it was H.O. who jammed the marble into the thimble first of all. So I said, "It's H.O.'s fault, as much as mine, anyhow. Why shouldn't he pay?" Oswald didn't so much mind paying for the beastly scissors, but he hates injustice of every kind. "He's such a little kid," said Dickie. Of course H.O. said he wasn't a little kid, and it is very nearly came to being a row between them, but Oswald knows when to be generous. So he said, "Look here, I'll pay 6 pence of the scissors, and H.O. shall pay the rest, to teach him to be careful." H.O. agreed. He is not at all a mean kid, but I found out afterwards that Alice paid his share out of her own money. Then he wanted some new paints, and Noel wanted a pencil, a halfpenny account book to write poetry with, and it does seem hard never to have any apples. So, anyhow or other, nearly all the money got spent, and we agreed that we must let the advertisement run loose a little longer. "I only hope," Alice said, "that they won't have got all the ladies and gentlemen they want before we have got the money to write for the sample and the instructions. And I was little afraid myself, because it seemed such a splendid chance. But we looked in the paper every day, and the advertisement was always there, so we thought it was all right. Then we had the detective try on, and it proved no go. And then, when all the money was gone except halfpenny of mine, and 2 pence of Noel's, and 3 pence of Dickie's, a few pennies that the girls had left, we held another council. Dora was sewing the buttons on H.O.'s Sunday things. He got himself a knife with his money, and he cut every single one of his best buttons off. They've no idea how many buttons there are on a suit. Dora counted them. There are 24, counting the little ones on the sleeves that don't undo. Alice was trying to teach Pincher to beg, but he has too much sense when he knows you've got nothing in your hands, and the rest of us were roasting potatoes under the fire. We had made a fire on purpose, though it was rather warm. They were very good if you cut away the burned parts, but you ought to wash them first, or you are a dirty boy. "Well, what can we do?" asked Dickie. "You are so fond of saying, 'Let's do something,' and never saying what." "We can't try the advertisement yet. Shall we try rescuing someone?" said Oswald. It was his own idea, but he didn't insist on doing it, though he is next to the eldest, for he knows it is bad manners to make people do what you want, and they would rather not. "What was Noel's plan?" Alice asked. "A princess or a poetry book," said Noel sleepily. He was laying on his back on the sofa, kicking his legs. "Only I shall look for a princess all by myself, but I'll let you see her when we are married." "Have you got enough poetry to make a book?" Dickie asked, and it was rather sensible of him, because when Noel came to look, there were only 7 of his poems that any of us could understand. There was The Wreck of the Malabar, and the poem was wrote when Eliza took us to hear the reviving preacher, and everybody cried. And Father said it must have been the preacher's eloquence, so Noel wrote, "O eloquence, and what art thou? Ay, what art thou? Because we cried, and everybody cried inside. When they came out their eyes were red, and it was your doing," Father said. But Noel told Alice he got the first line and a half from a book a boy at school was going to write when he had time. Besides this, there was the lines of a dead black beetle that was poisoned. "Beetle, how I weep to see thee lying on thy poor back. It is so very sad indeed. You were so shiny and black. I wish you were alive again, but Eliza says wishing it is nonsense and a shame." It was very good, beetle poison, and there were hundreds of them lying dead, but Noel only wrote a piece of poetry for one of them. but he said he hadn't time to do them all. The worst of it was, he didn't know which one he'd written it to, so Alice couldn't bury the beetle and put the lines on its grave, though she wanted to very much. Well, it was quite plain there wasn't enough poetry for a book. We might wait a year or two, said Noel. I shall be sure to make some more sometime. I thought of a piece about a fly this morning that knew condensed milk was sticky. But we want the money now, said Dickie, and you can go on writing just the same. It will come in some time or other. There's poetry in the newspaper, said Alice. Down, Pincher. You'll never be a clever dog, so it's no good trying. Do they pay for it? Dickie thought. He often thinks of things that are really important, even if they are a little dull. I don't know, but I shouldn't think anyone would let them print their poetry without. I wouldn't, I know. That was Dora, but Noel said he wouldn't mind if he didn't get paid, as long as he saw his poetry printed, and his name at the end. We might try anyway, said Oswald. He is always willing to give other people's ideas a fair trial. So we copied out The Wreck of the Malabar and the other 6 poems on drawing paper. Dora did it. She writes best, and Oswald drew a picture of the Malabar going down with all hands. It was a full-rigged schooner, and all the ropes and sails were correct, because my cousin is in the Navy, and he showed me. We thought a long time whether we'd write a letter and send it by post with the poetry, and Dora thought it would be best. But Noel said he couldn't bear not to know at once if the paper would print the poetry, so we decided to take it. I went with Noel because I am the eldest, and he is not old enough to go to London by himself. Dickie said poetry was rot, and he was glad he hadn't got to make a fool of himself. That was because there was not enough money for him to go with us. H.O. couldn't come either, but he came to the station to see us off, and waved his cap and called out, "Good hunting," as the train started. There was a lady in spectacles in the corner. She was writing with a pencil on the edge of long strips of paper that had print all down them. When the train started, she asked. "What was that?" he said. So Oswald answered, "It was Good Hunting. It's out of the Jungle Book." "That's very pleasant to hear," the lady said. "I'm very pleased to meet people who know their Jungle Book." "And where are you off to? The Zoological Gardens to look for Bagheera?" We were pleased, too, to meet someone who knew the Jungle Book. So Oswald said, "We are going to restore the fallen fortunes of the house of Bastable, and we have only thought of different ways, and we're going to try them all. Noel's way is poetry. I suppose great poets get paid." The lady laughed. She was awfully jolly, and said she was a sort of poet, too, and the long strips of paper were the proofs of her new book of stories, because before books it's made into real books, the pages and covers. They sometimes print it all on strips of paper, and the writer makes marks on it with a pencil to show the printers what idiots they are not to understand what a writer means to have printed. We told her all about digging for treasures and what we meant to do. Then she asked to see Noel's poetry, and he said he didn't like to. So she said, "Look here, if you'll show me yours, I'll show you some of mine." And so he agreed. The jolly lady read Noel's poetry, and she said she liked it very much, and she thought a great deal of the picture of the Malabar. And then she said, "I write serious poetry like yours myself, too. But I have a piece here that I think you will like, because it's about a boy. She gave it to us so I can copy it down, and I will, for it shows that some grown-up ladies are not so silly as others. I like it better than Noel's poetry, though I told him I did not, because he looked as if he was going to cry." This was very wrong, for you should always speak the truth, however unhappy it makes people, and I generally do, but I did not want him crying in the railway carriage. The lady's piece of poetry. Oh, when I wake up in my bed and see the sun all fat and red, I'm glad to have another day for all my different kinds of play. There are so many things to do, the things that make a man of you, if grown-ups did not get so vexed and wonder what you will do next. I often wonder whether they ever made up our kind of play, if they were always good as gold and only did what they were told. They like you best to play with tops and toys in boxes, bought in shops. They do not even know the names of really interesting games. They will not let you play with fire or trip your sister up with wire. They grudge the tea tray from a drum or booby traps with collars come. They don't like fishing, it's true. You sometimes soak a suit or two. They look on fireworks, though they're dry, with quite a disapproving eye. They do not understand the way to get the most out of your day. They do not know how hunger feels, nor what you need between your meals. And when you're sent to bed at night, they're happy, but they're not polite. For through the door you hear them say, "He's done his mischief for the day." She told us a lot of other pieces, but I cannot remember them, and she talked to us all the way up, and when we got near to Cannon Street she said, "You've got 2 new shillings here. Do you think they would help to smooth the path to fame?" Noel said, "Thank you," and he was going to take the shilling, but Oswald, who always remembers what he is told, said, "Thank you very much, but Father told us we ought never to take anything from strangers." "That's a nasty one," said the lady. She didn't talk a bit like a real lady, but more like a jolly sort of grown-up boy in a dress and hat. A very nasty one. But don't you think, as Noel and I are both poets, I might be considered as a sort of relation? You've heard the brother poet, haven't you? Don't you think Noel and our aunt and nephew poets, or some such relation of that kind? I didn't know what to say, and she went on. "It's awfully straight of you to stick to what your father tells you, but look here, you take the shillings, and here's my card. When you get home, tell your father all about it, and if he says no, you can just bring the shillings back to me." So we took the shillings, and she shook hands with us and said, "Goodbye, and good hunting." We did tell Father all about it, and he said it was all right, and when he looked at the card he told us we were highly honored, for the lady wrote better poetry than any other lady alive now. We had never heard of her, and she seemed much too jolly for a poet. Good old Kipling. We owe him those 2 shillings, as well as the Jungle Books.